just to say it's real and then it's not, you know. Customer service, so, yeah.
La cabine est là. Parce que oui, mais tu dois monter pour redescendre.
Non, 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 c'est toujours par l'autre côté.
So, did you call me?
Yes.
Okay.
How are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Good morning. Hi, good morning. Okay.
Yeah, no, well.
How are you? That's fine. That's fine for me. And I think this is more or less the size of the room of we have. Yes, it is. It is. But maybe some people, you know, Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to this session of the Animal Welfare Intergroup. And good morning to everybody who's following us online as well. Today's meeting, ending fur farming in the EU, animal welfare and policy pathways, takes place at a particularly relevant moment as the European Commission is finalizing its communication on fur following the Fur-Free European Citizens Initiative and growing scientific and societal momentum for ending fur farming in the EU. Against this broader political background, today's session will focus on fur farming and three key dimensions: better regulation considerations, economic arguments, and veterinary evidence on animal welfare. The objective is to support an evidence-based discussion on the policy pathways towards ending fur farming in the EU. Before we start, I would like to briefly just mention a couple of relevant animal welfare points happening this week and beyond, on which the Intergroup is actively involved. Number one, we adopted finally this week the regulation on the welfare of dogs and cats and their traceability. That represents actually the most significant animal welfare achievement of this mandate so far. My congratulations goes to the rapporteur, Veronika Riccionova, who I just met in the hallway. She's vice president of this intergroup, and she sends her regards. She has to be at the livestock debate where she has speaking time in the plenary right now. But she was the rapporteur, and congratulations to her and other colleagues who have been involved. I think it's fair to say that this intergroup played quite a significant role in the results. We coordinated and made sure that we had a lot of votes for a progressive position, and so I think it also shows that the intergroup actually can make important results when we work together. Second, the Fidenza report on livestock farming. That's what's being debated right now, and we'll vote on that later today. The Fidenza report on sustainable livestock farming offers useful reflections on the future of EU livestock systems, but it falls short of fully recognizing animal welfare as a core pillar of sustainability. Animal welfare, it would be an exaggeration to say that it's really a dominant theme in this report, to our regret. And in addition, paragraph 10 of the report raises concerns by questioning the advocacy role of civil society organizations and NGOs in EU policy making, including in the field of animal welfare. This approach risks overlooking the important contributions that these organizations make to inform transparent and evidence-based policy discussions at the EU level, like the one where we will have today. So it is a report with some problems, if you ask me. So we'll be voting on it later today. 3, we have had an oral question on EU animal welfare legislation, and we regret that it has not been possible to ensure a plenary debate on the oral question on the revision of the EU animal welfare legislation, despite strong cross-party support and the clear urgency of the issues. You know that the European Commission has promised a revision of the animal welfare legislation, and we've yet to see what will come out and what the Commission how they will deliver on these promises, and that's what we want to debate. That has not been possible this time, but we are currently looking at other opportunities to have a plenary debate, and we will keep you updated. Practical remarks. Today's session is in person and remote participation. There are also people following us in the streaming of this meeting on Interactio and YouTube. And the interpretation is available in English, French, German, Italian, and Spanish. And we will record the session, and we'll make the materials available on the Intergroup website, including slides that are being used for the presentations. So we have 3 interventions today. First, we will look at the question why FIR standards are not better regulation. And I'm very pleased to open this first presentation with Nick Clark, Wild Animal Program Leader here at the Eurogroup for Animals. Nick works on EU-level advocacy related to wildlife trade, exotic animals, and fur farming, with focus on animal welfare policy and regulatory coherence. In his presentation, he will look at fur farming standards from a better regulation perspective. So, dear Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much, Niels. Okay, let's get started today at the heart of the issue. So there are inherent problems with fur farming that just simply cannot be resolved. And this is exactly the reason why 1.5 million citizens signed the ECI demanding a ban on fur farming and a ban on the marketing of farmed fur products. Now, I walk to work every day in Brussels, and I pass the Berlaymont building, and just this week, on the Berlaymont building, on the side of it, there's gigantic letters that say, democracy. That's all it says, democracy. And every time I walk past this week, knowing that this presentation is coming up, knowing the communication is coming up from the Commission, and I think to myself, surely in a democracy we should be listening to what the citizens actually want. And unfortunately, it seems that the Commission is not moving in that direction, and they're moving more towards standards for fur farming rather than what the ECI has actually called for. So let me be clear, standards would represent democracy in action, not democracy in action, which is exactly what we should be seeing. So, I mean, let's think about the member states. We have 24 member states that have introduced such strict rules that the industry has either shut down or is severely constrained, and 15 of those member states are full bans in place already. So the member states know about this problem. Even on the EU's own website, I've put it there on the slide, it says EU Democracy in Action, and it gives the European Citizens Initiative as a tool to reach that goal. So why are we still having this conversation that the Commission is potentially considering standards? So I'm going to make a call to action today. That's to the Commission, to listen to the 1.5 million citizens who asked for a ban on farmed fur and the placement on the market. Ensure that your communication actually contains a phase-out for fur farming. There is still time. Much better to make that happen now. And a call to the Parliament to please put pressure on the Commission to make that happen. Now, if standards come out, we hear all the time about better regulation in the European Commission. And we're going to discuss today how standards really are not using this better regulation approach. So what is better regulation? It's the idea that the EU actions should be based upon evidence, that they should be making rules simpler, to have better EU rules involving citizens, involving businesses and stakeholders in decision-making process. So let's go one by one and see how standards fit with this better regulation approach. So according to the European Commission, better regulation ensures policy and decision-making that is informed by the best available evidence. Well, when the ECI first came out, the first communication from the Commission said, we are missing 2 pieces of evidence. We need 2 reports. The first one is on a socio-economic aspects. Now, that report has not been completed yet. We haven't seen it. Where is the evidence for us to really understand how the Commission is using that? That report's not completed. The other question was on welfare. And they said they didn't have enough evidence on welfare. So they asked for an EFSA opinion on this welfare. And the results were very, very clear. It stated in the EFSA opinion that the majority of the welfare consequences listed cannot be prevented or substantially mitigated within the current husbandry system. Now, what does that mean? That means that if the European Commission comes out with a communication that is based within the current system, then they are categorically ignoring their own scientific opinion. That's not best evidence available. That's not better regulation. So better regulation should also be effective, efficient, and coherent. Well, let's talk about coherence. Standards for fur farming cannot be reconciled with the existing invasive alien species regulation. The American mink just recently were listed onto the Union list of invasive alien species. And let's remember that mink is the most farmed species in the European Union. And this would effectively mean that mink can't be farmed in the future. So how does this reconcile with making standards for farming mink? It simply doesn't make sense. Now, under Article 9 of the regulation, you can have some derogations, but these derogations must be approved based on compelling public interest. Now, when we're talking about fur farming, given the poor economic performance, the environmental harms, the health risks, the ecological impacts, the only compelling public interest is to not have fur farming at all. So we can't imagine how derogations could be granted. It's also in contravention of the General Farming Directive, which states in its annexes that no animal should be kept for farming purposes unless it can reasonably be expected on the basis of its genotype and phenotype that it can be kept without detrimental effect to its health or welfare. Now, we've seen the EFSA opinion. The EFSA opinion shows clearly that this is not the case for the 4 species of fur-farmed animals. And I'm sure we'll hear from our speaker from the FEE later about that as well. So it's not coherent with existing regulation. What about effective? Now, there's a brand new paper from the Animal Welfare Committee in the UK. This was commissioned by the UK government and published by DEFRA just in February this year. It's brand new. Now, this paper corroborates the welfare harms that we saw in the EFSA opinion. But it also states that consumer and market forces currently do not and cannot provide sufficient pressure to adequately safeguard animal welfare. Really strong words. It then also is very concerned about the welfare at the time of killing, which is something that was not mandated for the EFSA opinion. And it also, regarding certification assurance schemes, or these high welfare fur farms, let's say, it provides a scathing account in an assessment on the sufficiency of welfare standards, which include schemes such as welfare and Furmark. Let's not get me started on efficiency, because we'll be here all day. But the better regulation approach also should have less red tape and reporting. Nobody's been able to explain to me yet how the member states or the Commission would be able to ensure that these rules are being followed. The inspection processes, the paperwork needed would be extremely cumbersome, would represent much more red tape. Imagine the life of a farmer who's going to have to change their standards and change their reporting processes. They'll still have to have strong biosecurity reporting. And what about checking the imports from third countries? The red tape is going to be enormous in that situation. And what about the 24 existing countries, the countries that have existing laws? What's going to happen to them? I'll come back to that one in the Q&A if there's time. Another part of the better regulation aims is that it should be fit for purpose and for future challenges. Well, we also know, according to the EFSA opinion, like I mentioned, if it's within the same system, there's no guarantee of animal welfare improvements. So we actually would be basing these standards without evidence for animal welfare. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. Would there be improvements to the environmental harms or the particulate matter? Would there be improvements to the biodiversity impact through escaped animals? And would there be improvements to biodiversity impacts? We don't think that standards would be fit for purpose either. Now, the final one for better regulation ensures that policy and decision-making should mean that EU values are promoted worldwide. Now, there is only one EU value when it comes to fur farming, and that is that we should not be doing fur farming. It should not be happening. So we even have, this is an infographic from a brand new poll, which was done in 18 member states with 18,000 people. There's also a separate poll in Hungary, which shows the same results, so 19 member states, that demonstrates strong support for a ban on fur farming in the EU and for a ban on the import of farmed fur products. Now, if you add this to the 1.5 million citizens who signed the ECI, you have a compelling case for democracy. So let's come back to the calls. If the Commission wants to really understand and be worthy of this democracy sign, listen to the 1.5 million citizens and please include a phase-out of fur farming in the communication. Thank you very much.
Right, Nick, thank you very much. That's a clear message to politicians and to the Commission. If I understand you correctly, there are no standards that will do the job.
Exactly.
And that's maybe the main conclusion, as far as I can hear it, but we can take a round on the questions and maybe you can elaborate. But before that, we will go to the second presentation, which is the economic perspective that we're turning to now. So I'm very pleased to welcome back Griffin Carpenter, whom we've had the pleasure of hearing at previous occasions. Griffin Carpenter is an environmental economist specializing in environmental, agricultural, and animal welfare policy analysis, including cost, benefit, and market assessments. And so Mr. Carpenter will today in his presentation share the economic analysis. What does it mean, this sector, the fur sector, from an economic perspective? What are the costs? What are the benefits from an economic perspective? But Mr. Carpenter, the floor is yours, please.
Great. Well, thank you for the invitation to speak this morning. As mentioned, my name is Griffin Carpenter. I'm an economist specializing in policy impact assessment, and I'll be presenting some recent research on EU fur production. Next slide, please. So in this presentation, first I'm going to present the results of the study you see on the right. This is detailing the economic, the non-economic, and the total contribution of the EU fur industry. And then I'll comment on the economics of a fur ban or standards, as Nick was just presenting. Next slide. So EU fur farming is predominantly mink, American mink, and the main producers left are Poland, Greece, and Finland, with Poland recently introducing a national ban that will come into force in a few years. In terms of economic value, production is about 183 million euros a year. To give a bit of context, that's the same as sour cherry farming or buffalo milk farming. Other sectors, video rental sector. And the jobs are about 2,000 FTEs in fur farming. Again, that's similar to video rental sector. The sector's been unprofitable for several years now, and thus no wonder you see on the graph on the right there a 92% decline over the past decade in production value. Next slide. So it's not just the economic contribution, but the non-economic contribution or the externalities. There are many for the sector. Pollution is a big one that's not talked about too often. But it's extremely costly. So one of the largest sources of pollution is from unmanaged manure on farms, which causes particulate matter in the atmosphere and is a cause of chronic respiratory illness, which causes premature deaths. And not just in the country where fur is being farmed, but actually fine particulate matter spreads across borders. So even in countries with bans at the moment, they're suffering from chronic respiratory illnesses caused by fur farming in neighboring EU countries. Other costs, invasive alien species, both mink and actually raccoon dog are both on the EU's IAS list. So the cost of eradicating these species from the natural environment is extremely costly. You can see the estimates there. And then public health, so zoonotic exposure. People might remember headlines during COVID, of course, that new strains were being developed on fur farms. So extremely high risk, even a low probability event has a huge economic cost. So a small chance of a new strain being developed on fur farms in the future, if it causes another COVID outbreak, is extremely damaging. So scientific reviews have actually put fur farming in the same high risk category for public health as bushmeat trade or live animal markets. Next slide, please. So taking this together, the economic contribution of the industry, the non-economic contribution, is the total economic contribution. So what we do here is we take the gross value added from the industry, and then we subtract those externalities, the environmental externalities or the public health externalities. So on the right, we see an example. This is Holcim, a Swiss building material company. So they have their GVA of 20 billion Swiss francs. And then if you subtract the air pollution, water consumption, land use and biodiversity loss, you get the adjusted, not 20 billion, but now 6 billion in societal value. So this is the approach of full cost accounting. And if we apply it to the fur farming sector, it's actually the only case I've ever seen where we're starting with a sector that is so unprofitable, actually its GVA is negative. Its gross value added is already negative. So we're starting from a point of negative 9 million in gross value added. And then once we put on the environmental externalities, public health externalities, we get to negative 446 million. And this isn't including anything about animal welfare. In economics, we try to cost as much as we can, but that's one we haven't been able to put a euro value on yet. So that's just environment and public health externalities. Next slide, please. And here's the visual way of showing that. So you start with the 183 million euros in revenue from the sector on the left, subtract the costs, we have negative GVA, and then subtract all the externalities, and you're left with that more or less $500 million in societal loss. Next slide. So that's the state of the industry at the moment. Now we'll discuss the economics of a fur ban. Next slide. And to think through the economics of a EU ban, we have to start global. Because if a ban just shifts production from the EU to third countries, well, then we haven't really achieved that much. The global impact is small. If you look at the graph on the right, you can see global production, and EU's in the dark green there. And two things that might stand out. One is the EU is actually a significant producer of fur. It's the #1 producer. So EU, then China, Russia, and a small amount from other countries like North America. So EU is a large producer because it can produce efficiently at a certain quality standard. EU is still the lowest cost producer. And then #2, you'll see on the graph that actually EU production has been declining over the last decades. And what you don't see is that as EU production declines, it's being compensated for by third countries that increase their production to fill the gap. As some of the large countries ban fur production, as Denmark banned fur production, you don't see other countries filling that gap. So what we can see here is that an EU fur ban is unlikely to shift production to third countries. It hasn't been the case historically. They can't produce at the quality standard and price point that the EU is currently doing. Next slide, please. And that's because the story of the global fur market isn't about the supply side. It isn't about countries implementing new bans. It's actually about declining demand. And how do we know this? It's because production is declining, as we saw in the last graph, and prices are declining at the same time. So if it was a story of bans and restricted supply, you would see prices going up. There's high demand for the few amount of furs being produced, but it's the opposite. Prices have been going down over the past decade, which means demand is falling even more than supply. It's a demand side shock. Next slide, please. So now, I guess as an alternative to ban, standards are being discussed, it seems like at the EU level. So economics can provide some insight onto this idea. I guess there's two major things that stand out to me here. One is that if you remember from the earlier slides here, we're talking about multiple externalities. It's not just an animal welfare issue. We're talking about pollution. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about marine eutrophication from manure, public health risks. So there are many different externalities that need to be addressed. So if you develop standards, either one, you have to develop standards that address all of these problems. So there's a list of standards for animal welfare. There's a list of standards for dealing with manure use and pollution. There's a list of standards for spreading out cages, putting fences around the perimeter to prevent another outbreak of COVID. standards to reduce the risk down to zero for invasive alien species and escape. So you need standards across all those different domains. And at the moment, we're just talking about animal welfare. And if there's only animal welfare standards, then all of those other externalities, all those extra costs remain. So it's one or the other. The other thing is that at the moment, the industry is unprofitable. So production costs are already above pulp prices, and this is why the number of farms every year keeps declining and declining and declining as some farms stop waiting for prices to increase and close up shop. And standards are going to raise production costs even higher. So on the right, you see the production costs in the black line. You can see the decline in prices for mink at the top, fox at the bottom. You can see prices are below production costs, and production costs are just going to raise higher. So either EU fur farms are going to continue to go out of business, or there's some sort of public funding in order to meet the new standards. Next slide, please. And this brings up the final point, which is about the transition. So how is this industry going to end? And I see kind of two options here. One is a continued decline, like we've seen over the last decade. Basically, we have this zombie industry that's unable to cover its costs. And there's a certain free market economics here that says, well, that's how the market works. It's going to naturally end. Standards, in a way, would just accelerate this decline. But it's not a particularly compassionate approach to managing the industry. So the alternative is some sort of just transition, that you have a ban, and therefore it's kind of a transition with intention. Because you're purposely ending the industry, you now have options for compensation, transition, and we actually have lots of examples to learn from, because as already been mentioned, the vast majority of member states have already put in national bans. So we already have different forms of transition. We can learn from the best examples that have taken place at the national level and apply that for an EU ban should it come into place. Next slide. So that's the end of the presentation. Looking forward to discussing more in the discussion, and that full cost accounting report is online should you want to look at the details.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carpenter. Very interesting indeed. The economic overview of the mink sector, where you say that actually the costs, the externalities are larger than the revenue, as far as I could figure from your presentation, and we'll get back to you when we have the questions. Now for the third and final presentation, we have the veterinary perspective. It is my pleasure to welcome Wiebke Jansen, Policy Lead at the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe, FVE. Dr. Jansen works on EU-level animal health and welfare policy, providing scientific and expert input to FVE's work at the EU level, grounded in a One Health, One Welfare approach. In her presentation, she will provide a veterinary assessment of fur farming systems from both an animal health and animal welfare perspective. Dear Dr. Jansen, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. As mentioned, I'm Wiebke Jansen. I'm the policy leader at the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe, and I'll briefly present the veterinary position on phasing out of fur farming in Europe today. Next slide, please. The Federation of Veterinarians of Europe represents over 330,000 veterinarians in 38 countries. Our position on fur farming was adopted in November 2025 following an extensive member consultation and informed by the EFSA opinion I mentioned before. Next slide, please. As veterinarians, our mission is not only animal health and welfare, but also public health and environmental protection. Fur farming raises concerns on all three fronts. We believe that fur farming is no longer sustainable, and therefore, when viewed through the One Health, One Welfare lens, it is disproportionate and unjustifiable. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, the animals bred for fur are wild or semi-wild, with behavioral and physiological needs that cannot be met in conventional farming conditions. Decades of barren wire cages have failed to meet basic welfare frameworks, and the public concern about this is now clear and widespread. Next slide, please. Across Europe, as mentioned before, the national measures are ahead of EU policy. Through our members, we have mapped the situation at national level, which is presented in the annex of our statement. And you can calculate this differently, but the 17 member states that have already complete bans or so severe restrictions that no fur farms operate in these countries. This is a clear sign. Next slide. Again, as mentioned before, fur farming also represents demonstrated zoonotic risks. We've seen SARS-CoV-2 transmission in mink farms and highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreaks. And despite biosecurity investment, farms remain dense reservoirs of susceptible animals. From a pandemic preparedness perspective, and this is a structural vulnerability. Next slide. The escaped American mink from farms are now invasive in 28 European countries. They prey on the native fauna and have contributed to the decline of the European mink, which is now considered as critical endangered. Again, as mentioned before, the EU has already recognized this by adding American mink to its invasive species list. Next slide. And therefore, FVE calls for a coordinated phase-out. We support a legally enacted EU-wide phase-out within the next decade, combined with a ban of placing fur and fur products on the EU market, a ban of import from outside the EU, and a support for rural livelihoods, transition periods, and investments in alternatives to ensure fairness, predictability, and sustainability. Next slide. This position is shared with our sister associations FECAVA and VESAVA and reflects a wide consensus across our member veterinary associations, including specific statements from our members in Finland, in Austria, in Italy, in Ireland, in Norway, in Sweden, and in Switzerland. The position is publicly available. Next slide. And ahead of the awaited Commission's communication in March 2026, we issued a joint press release. We wished to share this information proactively and hope that this contribution is useful in the context of the wider consultation process. The European Commission has formally acknowledged our joint position and confirmed that it is being actively considered in the ongoing discussions. Next slide. So to conclude, the fur farming presents significant challenges in terms of animal welfare, public health, and biodiversity. Current practices appear increasingly difficult to reconcile with European policy priorities and societal expectations. FE calls on EU policymakers to lead for coordinated, evidence-led, and compassionate transition away from fur farming. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Jansen. And now we basically have some time, if members wish, or any in the audience wish to have comments or questions, you're most welcome to do so. So I see Petrus, you have a comment, please.
Thank you. Good morning, and indeed, thank you very much for presentations and excellent information, a very comprehensive one, which brings me to a couple of reflections on my side. Well, the fur farming was banned in Lithuania, the country I represent, a couple of years ago. And indeed, because of very proactive, positive lobbying activities of certain NGOs and definitely convinced members of national parliament. But what I see still, ongoing kind of attacks from those fur farmers who have to cancel their activities in a couple of years to come, just calling for, well, I mean, look, we have to be compensated. I mean, them have to be compensated because of the loss of jobs, sales, and so on and so forth. And they never present a comprehensive, cost-related picture, as you did. I mean, all kind of the aspects of cost to society and environment. And indeed, those NGOs who are constantly involved in this exchange, well, definitely they can't have all or possess with all kind of argumentaire you have in your presentation. Well, my call on you is probably in our group, I mean, to make a kind of electronic or even printed booklet of the presentation on those comprehensive costs, what fur farming brings towards societies and national economies, with all aspects involved, in order to assist probably spreading this absolutely needed information across society, as well assisting those activists, I mean, positively minded politicians and NGOs in an ongoing struggle. It's kind of a perception issue sometimes. I mean, of course, I mean, you are closing business and direct losses are visible. So can we have, I mean, even more probably slides from your presentations, and to have in one piece of info, I would be more than glad, I mean, to translate and to spread around into my own language, as well as to use English, to bring kind of good defense line and good argumentaire, rational one, finally. Thank you.
Thank you, Petrus. And just to be clear, you say that in Lithuania you have actually a ban. Okay, so in Lithuania it's not really, that's not where we should fight, so to speak. But there are other.
We have a transitional period. I mean, I guess it's by 27. So that's why, I mean, some fur business tries to lobby to reopen this issue. And, well, as I said, I mean, to present as a job losses argument and the rest. But, I mean, formally the decision is approved, definitely. But we have to kind of, strengthen the defense lines of those who really are convinced on necessity to ban it and to continuously eradicate from national economy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, then we have Per Clausen. So, Per, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. It was very good, I think, and very useful for our work. I come from Denmark. I have worked for ban of fur farming in Denmark about 20 years, and we shut down this fur production during COVID-19, but now it's starting up again, and the government think it's very good. And I don't understand, because we have paid lots of money to the mink farmers when we shut the fur production down with COVID-19. So I think it's very good to have these good examples for where you can see that is also, from an economic point of view, is a good idea to stop this fur farming. And I think if you take animal welfare perspective, which was my first perspective when I started to work with this problem, is that mink is a solitary animal, and therefore it is impossible to operate mink production in an animal welfare responsible manner. I think it's very, very important to say that when you're talking about better regulation, it's not a good way to go. But I agree, we need this very, very good example, and I also think the economic point of view is very important. I would wish that it's enough to talk about animal welfare, but my experience shows me that isn't enough. And we need to go against this massive propaganda from the fur farmers, because they're talking about it's very, very important for Danish economy. They're talking very much about that. And I think you have very good examples here. So thank you for a good presentation, and I hope we could use this information in our work. And one question: what's the reason that the Commission listened to this lobbies from the fur farmers? It's a very little population, very, very few people are working in this industry. So why are they listening to them?
Thank you very much, Per. And maybe we can go to the speakers to respond. I think there are some good points raised both by Petrus and Per. Both perhaps we could hear on the economic side of things from Griffin Carpenter. I would also chip in here. Maybe Griffin, you could elaborate on the costs that you describe. How do you calculate these? Is that money that is actually being used to mitigate environmental pollution coming from the fur farms, or is that a calculation where you calculate what would you estimate is the damage being done? Not necessarily the money being spent by government, but the money that would need to be spent in order to mitigate this. How do you calculate the costs? So that would be my question to follow up on, or to supplement Petrus and Per. And maybe also what Per says about mink being a solitary animal. I think that's also seems important to me, or that seems like an important point. So Nick Clark and also Dr. Jansen, I get the impression you're saying that there are no standards really that can remedy these animal welfare harm that is being done. The mink as a solitary animal, how is that? Is that the reason basically you're saying? Is that the reason for your conclusion that if you have a solitary animal, but you have a mink farm? So you have a solitary animal, but you stuff them together in a very closed environment. So you force them to be together, and maybe they don't really like that. So how can you make good animal welfare out of that? That seems like some challenge, I would say. So maybe you can elaborate on that. Maybe Nick Clark, you could start.
Where to begin? I think I'll start with your question first, and then maybe make a few other comments, and then pass to Griffin. You're absolutely right to say that about the mink being solitary animals. It's not just the fact that they're solitary either. It's about their biological motivations, right? So animals have their needs, behavioral motivations, and if you take the sort of fur standards that currently exist, it's mostly based around freedom from types of models for animal welfare, so free from fear and all these kinds of things, which, of course, these mink are still going to be very fearful even in these cages. But when you take the 5 domains approach, which also includes the mental state of the animal, so you have different domains that come together to contribute to a good or bad mental state of an animal, then the agency of the animal to actually conduct its behavioral motivations comes into play as well. So mink are solitary animals. They have a huge territory during the day. So they simply cannot move around as much as they would need to. They don't get the exercise. They're territorial as well as being solitary, yet they're stuck right next to cages where they can see multiple conspecifics, so multiple other mink, right next to them. The noise is crazy. It's an extremely damaging environment for them. They can even reach between the cages and cause each other damage, and cause each other really bad lesions through the cages. So in order to get standards to allow for these kinds of behaviors, you'd be talking about cages that are absolutely ridiculously enormous, that would just be completely unfeasible. If you look at zoo standards for mink, I think it's around 50% of the cage should be water. They should always have access to water, because when mink are hungry, they want to find their food. They want to search for it. They want to swim. So these are situations that simply cannot be improved by incremental standards. So that's one aspect. Then a couple of other points that were mentioned. Yes, sadly, the animal welfare perspective should be enough to convince everybody. It's just not the case. But we're sitting here talking about one of the few cases where every aspect that we talk about points in one direction, which is a ban. I don't think I've ever seen a file, I've certainly never worked on one, where every piece of evidence makes it so clear what we should do, whether we're talking about economics, the welfare, but also, as Griffin said very well in his presentation, the environmental damage. There's even, I've heard, and it's in Griffin's report, which he can elaborate on, but there are harms from fur farms that cause damages in other countries that have banned fur farming from the fine particulate matter. So it's a European issue. It's truly a European issue if we're talking about subsidiarity. So every area counts there. And we talked about having this evidence kind of written down so that people can use it well. I would say, in the meantime, Griffin's report is a very, very good place to start. And I think it's our job now to make that very digestible and very easy for the arguments to be made. And my final point, although I have another point to make later on, is the question about commissioners. Why are they listening? The Commission. Why are they listening to the industry? I think it's good that they listen to the industry. They should listen to everybody. But one of the problems is that they didn't listen to the organizers of the Fur Free Europe, ECI. For example, Commissioner Varhelyi has not met with us yet. And I think that's fairly fundamental before coming up with an answer to an ECI would be for the Commissioner for Health and Animal Welfare to meet with the ECI organizers. There were also 3 workshops that were done as part of an economic study where NGOs were not even invited and not even made aware of at the time. Yet there was no such workshop for understanding the ins and outs of how a phase-out should work. These workshops were on how should standards work. So this doesn't seem like, in terms of better regulation and access to stakeholders, doesn't seem like better regulation to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Then Griffin, Carpenter, would you like to comment? Maybe also on your report. Is that a report? Is it slides, or is it in a printed form, or how can we get it and distribute it?
Happy to start there. So the report, it's called A Full Cost Account of the EU Fur Industry. It's online on my website, griffincarpenter.org. Probably from the intergroup can post it as well. And yeah, excellent question about how the costs are calculated. Could spend a long time talking about that, but I guess in economics we have a number of different tools to try to assess costs that aren't on the balance sheet, not just the wage costs, disposal costs of carcasses, the direct fur farm costs, but also those external costs, the fine particulate matter and so on. So some are managed through damage costs. Fine particulate matter causes sickness. How many sick days are there and lost productivity to the EU economy, or local disamenity value? So the odors and flies from fur farms, how much are properties within a 2-kilometer radius of a fur farm? How much lower are those property prices compared to similar properties close to other farms? or things like mitigation costs or prevention costs. So that's looking at things like, if you were to try to prevent zoonotic exposure and another COVID outbreak, how much would it cost to space out the cages for vaccination programs? So those costs that aren't being paid right now because we don't have standards, how much would that cost? So there's a number of different tools to try to estimate those off-balance sheet costs. And of course, just a reminder, the costs that are on the balance sheet are already greater than the revenues. Costs are exceeding revenues for a number of years now in the industry, and that's why every year more and more farmers leave. Just quickly on some of the other points that were raised. I can't speak to the lobbying efforts, of course. I suspect maybe, as we saw in one of the graphs in my presentation, the EU is a large global producer of fur. So it's a small industry, but the EU is one of the large providers. That might attract the eye of Commission officials. On the other side, I suppose, since the EU is one of the large producers, there's actually impact here. We're not talking about an industry where the EU is marginal production at the global level. The decisions being made here by the EU are extremely consequential at the global level. And lastly, just on compensation, I think it's a great question because we think about EU funds as finite. There's only so much we can fund, so let's use that money in the best way possible. But also in terms of time and energy to designing programs, that I think if we go down the standards route and we spend the next years designing the best standards, putting our energy into that, it's kind of a loss if that time could be better spent designing transition programs. Well, what are the best transition schemes that we've learned from the member state level? How can we put those into practice? So with finite time and energy, I think it's the right question to be asking.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carpenter. And then we have Dr. Jansen, if you want to come in as the last one to comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to comment quickly on the physiological needs. So yes, mink are solitary and they are hunters and they are semi-aquatic. So water is a high value resource for them and they need to climb and to move and to forage, and barren wire cages will never be able to provide this. Another point which we haven't touched upon today is the killing for harvest and as well for depopulation in case of the outbreak of animal diseases. And in these cases, minks are usually restrained manually or in traps and then killed with carbodioxin. And fox and other are grasped with metal tongs around the neck and electrocuted. Chinchillas are lethally injected. And we would agree that these empirical developed methods too often fail to ensure a humane death and are likely to cause distress, pain, and undue suffering. This is an additional point.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jansen. We're coming to an end. We also have Christian from Bulgaria here, and I don't know, Christian, if you want to come in. I don't know what the situation in Bulgaria is with when it comes to mink, but thank you for being here and listening in. We're coming to an end, so we will close the meeting. But just a final remark, I think it seems pretty clear that standards from the experts that we've spoken with here. Well, there doesn't seem to be any standards that will actually provide for animal welfare when it comes to the fur farming that we're talking about, and also the economic analysis shows that actually the costs are larger than the benefits of the revenue. So it seems clear that we don't need so many standards. Maybe we just need a phase out of the fur farming, and that's what we'll be working for. And thank you to all speakers and participants. We'll be continuing this struggle. Next meeting is in 21st of May, and we'll be discussing the EU Biotech Act. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.